Hey everyone, it's your favorite Black single mom here, the millennial introvert, and today I wanted to talk about something that's coming out of Maryland that has pissed me off to no effing end. So, y'all know, I don't know if you know, but I'm in Maryland, so this would actually affect my children potentially, especially considering one of my sons is actually going to third grade this like next year when school starts in August. And so I wanted to talk to you all about this new initiative that the school system has come up with. Like they're going to do everything but what they're supposed to be doing, right? So now apparently our Maryland state superintendent of our schools decides she wants to have children repeat the third grade if their reading literacy scores are not up to par. So we're going to overlook the bad teaching, the poor skills that teachers have to teach children adequately and properly how to read. We're going to overlook all that. We're going to overlook the government with their weak legislation of how and what is required for American public school curriculum so that children are guaranteed to know how to read. We're going to overlook the fact that most schools don't seem to know how to diagnose your child as being dyslexic. We're going to overlook all that and just say it's the child's fault. Like we're basically going back to the whole it's the parents' fault. They're not reading to them enough at home, the kids enough at home. It's the kids' fault. They're just not getting it. Like I would think, because children are pretty smart. They've learned so many things up until this point, but for some reason they can't learn how to read. And I don't think it's no coincidence that most teachers seem to be confused about what children need to know to learn how to read. For me personally, it is common sense. But you all know I already did a video from Hechinger Report where it discussed the many failures that the government and the school system have taken part in. And instead of our government and our school system saying, I'm sorry, here's an apology to the last generation of students who don't know how to read, we are going to take accountability, responsibility, and be transparent from here on out and change how we've been teaching children across the country. And we're going to put in better resources for children. Like if the child is struggling, where is the tutoring at? If the child's struggling, where are the summer enrichment programs at for literacy, specifically in math, so the kids can work a little extra? Like if that child's struggling, where's the extra? Like you can't have your entire classroom failing and saying it's the children. Because you don't know what the parents are doing at home. And you don't know if the child is dyslexic or what's going on with the child, because they usually don't have certified anywhere of anyone to tell you if your child has dyslexia or not. Or there could be other factors playing into that. So I want to read this article. So this woman, this superintendent, her name is Dr. Carey Wright. She actually came from Mississippi. And Mississippi did this initiative before PS come to Maryland, right? So she basically is bringing her stuff from Mississippi to Maryland and saying, well, it worked in Mississippi, so it'll work here. So let's read this article, and then we're going to discuss, did it really work in Mississippi? What were the pros and cons? Does holding a child back, what good is that going to do if the teachers are still teaching the same bad way? And now you have a child who's bored and probably feeling self-conscious because they're much older than their classmates and they're learning things they already learned. So they're basically sitting in class a whole another year behind their other classmates who went on to go to the next grade because they can't read. Not for science, math, social studies, all the other subjects. So now your child is just sitting there relearning the same 20 subjects because they can't read. Yeah, that's going to be successful. And then you're sitting here teaching the same bad way. like with your sight words or whatever these teachers are using. I'm like, it's phonics and that's it. That's all that matters. I don't know what everybody's doing. I don't know why it's called all these random things. It's phonics. And these teachers are trying to double down. The government. What I'm telling you now is my child will not be repeating anything. And I will fight this to the very end. I will go to every board meeting. I will do whatever I need to do. And my kids will also be getting homeschooled if necessary. Because my child's not going to sit up in the classroom another year looking at their teacher teach them sight words like they ain't got no sense. Okay, let me go ahead and read this article. So this is by 2027, Maryland State Board of Education wants to see the state's students' reading scores go up. Okay, so they love to do all this scores, all this scoring and testing, but no one is looking at the teachers, the school curriculum, the administrators, the government. Like, no one's looking at anyone else but the kids and their parents. We can't all be not teaching reading to our kids at home. Like, come on now. The only reason why my 20-year-old and my 17-year-old know how to read is because we homeschooled them. We literally took them away from the public school because they weren't learning anything. And I've talked to other parents who actually live in, they also live in like high income areas. And they said they specifically moved to high income areas so their child can be in a great school. And they're like, my child can barely write a paper. They can barely write an essay. The handwriting's bad. The grammar is bad. Everything is bad. It's awful. They can't read. Child, let me go ahead and get in this article because I'm getting madder by the minute. So the goal is to make the reading scores on the National Association of Educational Progress, sometimes referred to as, quote unquote, the nation's report card, go from near the bottom to within the country's top 10. Carey Wright, the Maryland State Superintendent of Schools, is bullish on the science of reading approach outlined in the draft. But are the teachers following suit is the question, because I'm pretty sure my kids' teachers are teaching sight words. I even had a teacher, and I have it recorded because they always like to try to backtrack. I even had a teacher say they were not going to be teaching handwriting or phonics in schools because I remember being really shocked. And that was for my second grader who's heading to third grade. And he only can read because I work with him. And it's a struggle because we have to undo the lazy, weird sight word teachings that his teacher did. We have to undo that when he gets home and I'm teaching him phonics and that's it. So the Department of Education is asking teachers, parents, staff, and students to weigh in, which I already did, on its draft policy for reading instruction. From now through July 19th, the online survey will be open for comments. Yes, they definitely heard from me. The science of reading approach is often referred to as a return to teaching phonics in state classrooms, but Wright said it's much more than phonics. It's phonics, that's all that matters. While phonics, understanding the relationship between letters and sounds, is part of the science of reading method. Wright said the science of reading also includes vocabulary building, comprehension, and fluency, meaning the ability to read smoothly and accurately. I can't. Like, honestly, like, you're doing too much and you're overthinking it. I feel like she needs to just get focused on teaching, unteaching the teachers, because they went to college for this mess that they're doing. Unteach what they've been miseducated. Let's unteach whatever they've been taught and teach them fun. Like during the summer, during the school year, have them continue to train, since everyone seems to be struggling with how to teach a child phonics, which is so simple and so obvious. It's complete common sense. My 7-year-old sister taught me when I was 4. She was 7 years old. And these grown teachers can't teach kids how to read. My sister taught me how to read. I knew how to read before I even went to kindergarten. So it's not that difficult. All the other stuff will come naturally the more children read. The older they get, the more their brains develop. I feel like we need to just get down to the nitty-gritty core of phonics before we go off into Never Never Land and bring in more things, because then people start bringing in their extra stuff too, and don't nobody want your sight words. So the state's draft policy also includes a call for screening for reading deficiencies. But are we going to be doing a screening of teachers teaching reading deficiencies? Like, are we going to look at teachers and the school administrators and say, what methods are you all using? Are we going to make it mandatory that they make phonics the primary focus? Not part of it, not a little bit of it. Primary, like the majority of the time. When you're talking about reading, it needs to be all about phonics. All about phonics. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less. Have the kids read aloud in the classroom like they used to do to us, so that can teach them fluency. Obviously, their little brain, kids are not dumb. So if they're not learning how to read, it's because of the grown-ups in the room. Their little brain, they can figure out what the story is talking about. That comes naturally, especially as they get older. Phonics start. So she's also saying that includes screenings for dyslexia. For example, they do not have specialists to actually diagnose children. I have to probably go find one, a private one, because I just talked to a school. All three of my sons have IEPs, and I just talked to my 8-year-old school, and was saying I think he might be dyslexic. And they were like, no, we did something, and he's not. I'm like, I think I'm gonna get a second opinion. I don't know if I can trust that. So Wright said it's a good way to rule something out, if you will, at an early age, rather than to wait until a child is older, only to find out that they really needed this special help all along. Exactly. So we don't want them to be dyslexic and you're holding them back another year. Like, what's that going to do? All that's going to do is put your child further behind. It's going to hurt their self-esteem. They're the biggest kid in the class. Like, they're not stupid. And kids might be making fun of them because they got held back and their peers are going on to the next grade. Like, I don't see any benefit in that. You need to be offering some tutoring. My son's school actually offers reading tutoring after school, like a few days a week. And they also have an enrichment program. That's one school out of many that's offering these things for free. That's what every school needs to be doing. So you can be one-on-one or in smaller groups, or give that extra time to students who are struggling to learn how to read, because they could be dyslexic. They could just need some extra help outside of the classroom. That's nearly not that difficult. Holding kids back, I cannot see the benefit. It's expensive because it costs a certain amount to teach children. You're not really looking at the problem, why the children are scoring so low. Like, especially if it's like half the classroom, majority of the classroom, maybe it's the teacher. It can't always be everyone else. Like, who's the common denominator here? So the state's blueprint for Maryland's future, a multi-billion-dollar education reform plan, requires the state and county school districts to maintain funding levels that match state education goals. Yeah, and I feel like this is all about the money, like always. They never have the correct objectives in place. Like their motives are never pure and genuine. They're always looking at money. So they just keep winning these scores, and no one's really getting to the root of the actual problem, which is the teachers can't teach. How about that? So instead of saying the kids can't read, the teachers can't teach, okay? So Wright told WTOP the plan includes making sure that teachers entering the field and even seasoned educators get high quality training in literacy. And I completely agree with that. Okay, so I feel like before they start testing the students, maybe you should be having an across the board statewide test for all teachers to see if they can pass the literacy teaching exam. Like, do you know how to teach students how to read? That's what we need to get to the bottom of, because you're around my student more than anyone. And then everyone wants to assume the students have these parents that are, one, we didn't go to college, nobody's college to teach kids how to read. So if we're teaching them, we're doing your job and probably better than you are without the college education. But also, some kids don't live with their parents. So what are you going to say now? Like, who are you going to whose accountability you going to roll over to next? Like, who's going to be the scapegoat for you if the parent is not around? Say they're dead, or they're gone, or they're in jail, like whatever the reason. Why are we kicking the problem down the street? What do they call, like, kicking a can down the road? When people just kicking it over, that's the government is known for that. That's their favorite strategy. Like, let's just kick it down to the next department or agency or whomever, and it's someone else's fault. No, you need to take accountability. Otherwise, what are you doing? Why do we vote you in office? Why are you being hired for your job and you can't do it? So she goes on to say, we've got to be figuring out how to support new teachers and classroom veterans alike with mentoring, induction programs, and a variety of other support. She said, I really don't care how they do it, y'all, as long as they do it. do something that's effective that works so our kids can learn properly to be competitive globally, like competitive nationwide, but globally. That's what I think about. Because if you're in the same country doing the same ignorant things, you're competing against other kids who can't read either. So it's really not that difficult versus you going up against kids in China, kids you're in England and Germany. Like, yeah, that's just, and even in Africa, like even children in Africa seem to value education more. It's a culture. That's a culture thing. That's a whole nother topic, y'all. So let's go ahead and look at, let me finish this up because this website's acting weird. So they're saying, along with improving student reading scores in the early grades, Wright said the state is examining math instruction. I love to hear that. That will be discussed at the next State Board of Education meeting on Tuesday, July 23rd, which I will be attending. So let's go ahead and look at this other article that's talking about the kids learning to read in Mississippi, where Miss Carey Wright, I thought she was a doctor, but they didn't put that anywhere in the article, so maybe she's not. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. I think she was a superintendent of Mississippi schools, public schools, before she came to Maryland. So let's read about that initiative and how that went when they held kids back in Mississippi, because I think they've already started doing it there. So 1 second. Okay, she is Dr. Carey Wright. I knew I had it right. I don't know why they never put her title in that last article. But anyway, so this is coming from the 74million.org. New study, holding kids back is one key factor in Mississippi's reading revolution. So Burke and Wright, while there should be exemptions, retention in third grade has a far greater positive impact than moving along a student who isn't ready. So let's see what they're talking about. So nearly a quarter of the way into the 21st century, the way children are taught is still evolving to keep pace with the world that seems to change every day. It should really not be changing. I mean, the same way people are reading today, they've been reading the same way for at least a century. While education has made great gains in so many areas, progress remains impeded by old, disproven misconceptions, especially when it comes to one of the most essential fundamental skills, the ability to read. A report released last week by Excel in Ed and Willock Educational Policy Center at Boston University should end the debate over the value of holding back students who are not reading at grade level by the end of third grade. I think it's interesting they're pointing out one report versus all the other ones that are saying it's not a good idea. And I also think it's interesting. I don't know if we had such a large group of generation of students and individuals, American citizens, who couldn't read until like maybe the last 20 years. So what was the problem? What's the problem over the last 20 years versus before that? Why weren't there issues before then? Oh yeah, because they were probably using just phonics. Let me continue. So this study reinforces what teachers and families already know. If early intervention and support for struggling readers were not enough for a child to read at grade level before fourth grade, providing more time in third grade dramatically increases their odds of succeeding in school and in life. I disagree. I completely disagree. Okay, so we were both fortunate to be part of a reading revolution in Mississippi. After decades of ranking near the bottom nationally in reading scores, Mississippi passed the Literacy-Based Promotion Act in 2013. 6 years later, the 2019 National Assessment of Educational Progress results demonstrated the impact of this comprehensive policy. During those 6 years, fourth graders showed a gain of 10 points, the equivalent of an entire grade level, on the NAEP reading exam. Mississippi was the only state in the entire nation to show reading gains that year. Any successful recipe has several complementary ingredients, and it is no different from Mississippi's reading policies. Making sure that teachers are trained in the science of reading is critical, as are early screening and intervention for the youngest students and dedicated reading coaches in schools. The curriculum must be phonics-based, and families must be included every step of the way. But like any recipe, removing or diluting just one ingredient can affect everything. So here they're saying that many states that have posted reading gains, including Mississippi, provide students with additional time in third grade if assessments show they are not ready to read at a higher level. Third grade retention is a last resort if years of intervention and support have not been enough. Now, I like that they're mentioning that there's been years of intervention and support, which of course my child did not receive, and a lot of kids didn't receive who had to endure COVID. My son, my 8-year-old, I feel like he really just fell through the cracks over and over and over. It was just one thing after another where he just wasn't getting the resources and the support that he needed to learn how to read and pretty much just learn his academics for his grade level. So they said here that third grade retention is a last resort. Like, for instance, I feel like every child should be going to pre-K for free. That would be great. Or you can actually start pre-K, I would say ages 3 and 4. I don't know why we wait till 5 years old to finally put kids in school and then be like, oh, they can't read. You didn't waste like 2 years of their life that you could have been teaching them something, and y'all just do not want to pay for it and do the right thing. So, and I mean, they're starting to finally get it together, but these are things they need to be focusing on and trying these things out different first before they just turn around and say, okay, kids need to repeat school. I feel like there's going to be more negative impacts of that. Moving along here, I would like to know, one, if they're following this class of students throughout their school academic career. But also, this is so early, just been so recently done. Do they have any studies of how these kids are going to fare at age 18, 19, 20? Did they stay in school? Are they moving on to be successful? Are they going to college after school? Are they loving to learn? Or are they dropping out? Like, what's going on? They can't tell you because they literally just rolled this out in 2019, and they're already trying to, like, just, again, throw something at the wall, see what sticks, just roll this out across the board, across the nation, and they don't even know if it worked the first time. It's like, oh, we see some points going up 1 year, and now it's like, let's make everybody's kid repeat classes or their grade because we saw some 10 points. You don't know why them 10 points did that. They have no clue why. Maybe it's because we're not dealing with COVID anymore. There could be a million different reasons. So here is saying third grade retention is a last resort. Again, so why third grade? Why third grade? Because studies have made it clear that students who are not reading at grade level when they enter fourth grade are not prepared for a critical transition, reading to learn, and have dramatically lower odds of succeeding in school or even graduating. While there should be exemptions for some students, including English learners, and opportunities to move on to the fourth grade by retaking assessments, teachers and families involved in a child's early and formative years understand that retention will have a far greater positive impact than moving along a student who just isn't ready. But anecdotal evidence is not enough to build education policy on. A new study by the Wheelock Educational Policy Center highlights the benefits of ensuring children enter fourth grade only when they are prepared. The research focused on students who scored within 20 points of the passing threshold in the third grade. By the time they were in sixth grade, these students on average scored in the 20th percentile for English language arts, but those who were retained in third grade scored on average around the 62nd percentile when they were in sixth grade. Clearly, ELA scores for students who were retained in Mississippi were substantially higher than for comparable children who were just barely promoted, especially among Black and Hispanic kids. And contrary to misconceptions, there was no impact on attendance in sixth grade or on other outcomes, including being identified for special education. Mississippi's test-based promotion policy led to substantial and sustained improvement in literacy outcomes for Mississippi students who repeated the third grade in 2015 and 2016. The report concludes, the positive magnitude of this finding is very large, and given similar results in other contexts, suggests that this may be a policy intervention other states should consider. Last year's NAEP results were a dramatic call to action, with decades of reading gains erased after the upheaval of the pandemic and basically teachers start not teaching phonics anymore. Nationally, student reading performance is at its lowest since the 1990s, because that's when they took phonics out, with a third of students in fourth and eighth grade not reading at grade level. And while reading scores also dropped slightly in Mississippi, our state remained above the national average. A further testament to not just our policies, but also the dedicated teachers and families making those policies work. Success is never final, and we know that our friends and neighbors in Mississippi and the rest of the nation all want the best for each child and student. It is time for every state to follow the evidence. Yeah, and the evidence says to make phonics the primary reading instruction, and they still don't do it. Teachers still don't do it. They're still fighting it and talking about the way I'm teaching them works, but like half your class can't read. if not more than half your class. And the kids that can read doesn't necessarily mean you taught them. Their parents could be teaching them at home. So it is time for every state to follow the evidence. That means focusing on prevention and intervention, but also considering the full suite of proven reading policies, including retention. To ensure the youngest readers have the opportunity to learn and thrive throughout school and for the rest of their lives. So I don't know if they are saying who they're saying to keep kids back. I have no clue. Like, are they talking about the ones whose birthday was early and they're very young? Like, it's funny because my twins are actually like the youngest group in their classroom, while my 8-year-old is like the oldest. His birthday was late and their birthday's in July. So they literally just turn the new age before they have to go to their next grade. So it's very interesting. But anyways, so I want to look at some other articles that are a lot more less biased, because apparently this woman is writing from Mississippi, because I heard her say something about our state and da-da-da. So she's in Mississippi and she's like, oh, it's working so great. Okay. So here we have, they blaming the pandemic now, child. Like they're just going to blame everything but themselves. This is the nation's report card. 2 decades of growth wiped out by 2 years of pandemic. What growth? You're saying the kids can't read. Like what was this growth? All this growth. Stop trying to blame every Tom, Dick, and Jane. I'm not going to listen to this video because it's going to be more of the same. Okay, let me, here we have, when I just type in holding kids back, this from understood.org saying recent research shows that for the most part, holding kids back a grade isn't the best practice. The National Association of School Psychologists reports that some kids do better in school the first year or two after being held back, but it also says that this effect doesn't last. And I agree. I think once kids get older and like high school level, and they're still like older than their classmates, I just feel like they're never going to quite feel right. Because I know for me, that was like one of my biggest fears, like having to repeat a grade. No thanks. So here they have a few different, you guys gotta excuse my kids because I have children. So here we have them talking about the research and what it shows. So they said why schools may recommend repeating a grade. So they said a child is very young for that grade or socially immature. A child has missed a lot of school due to serious illness. A child doesn't reach the performance level expected for moving to the next grade. Current thinking on retention. So here is saying that the NASP also points out that kids with learning and thinking differences may not do better at all unless there are new specific interventions in place. Okay, let me read that again. So the NASP also points out that kids with learning and thinking differences may not do better at all unless there are new specific interventions in place, which means basically if you have a teacher that does not know how to teach kids how to read, and you basically hold the child back, like is their problem that the teacher's like a bad teacher, doesn't know how to do their job. So children cannot learn if they have a teacher who does not know what they're doing. And then you're going to basically say, okay, it's a child's fault or the parents and the children's fault. Let's hold the kid back a whole other year to sit in class and continue to be taught incorrectly how to read. So what are you going to do then if they still don't get it? You're going to keep holding them back? Of course, in the state of Maryland, they claim that you can only do it one time. But yeah, one time is too many. So they're saying, what can we do? Of course, parents play an important role because half the time I'm teaching my kids everything they know because the teachers are not teaching them what they need to learn. So they're saying parents play an important role in their child's education. They have the right to be involved in the decision-making process. If the school suggests that your child repeat a year, it's a good idea to sit down with the teacher to find out why. You can also make what changes would be made in the ways your child is taught if repeating a grade. It's important to have a plan in place that you believe will help your child succeed. So when you're meeting with the child's teacher, they're suggesting that these are some questions you should bring up, which are there new accommodations that could increase your child's success in the classroom next year? Does your child's IEP goals and services need to be revised? Are summer learning programs available? Would one-on-one tutoring be helpful in making sure your child can move up to the next grade? It may help to go to this meeting prepared with the working knowledge of the pros and cons of retention And even if you disagree with your child's teacher, it's important to build a good relationship. Let's say that on both ends, okay? Because sometimes the teachers are like a nightmare. So some states have laws that say kids can't move up unless they can read at a certain level, but there can be exceptions. If your child is going to be held back, there should also be a plan to teach in new ways that may work better. I completely agree with that one. And there may be other options to consider before retention, which I also agree with that, such as tutoring, summer enrichment programs, so on and so forth. And these things need to be happening like years before a child is headed to third grade. Like, it's not enough to be like, oh, your child's struggling in second grade. Let's quickly throw them into. No, you need to be doing that from like jump, from kindergarten, if not pre-K. And it's a complete travesty to not have American students in starting school between with the ages of 3 or 4, and then wondering why they're so behind when you're on top of that teaching incorrectly. And then the child can also be having like special needs issues such as dyslexia or some other disability that's making it difficult for them to learn how to read. So don't want to be last minute, like, oh, we're just throwing something out there, see what sticks, and then holding a child back. Like, why is the child suffering because of the school and the government's inadequacies? So that's how I feel about it. There's a lot of articles that talk about how keeping kids behind a grade does not benefit them. And even if it's a temporary fix, if it does benefit, it's only temporary. It's not a long-lasting thing. I feel like, honestly, most children who have been held back are going to be high school dropouts, because, like, why are they in school a whole nother year, a whole extra year than their peers? A lot, especially black boys and Hispanic boys, going to be dropping out, because it's like, what am I doing? Like, I'm in school for like forever. You barely can get them to not drop out when they don't get held back, let alone like they're getting held back. That's recipe for disaster. But 1 second. So here is a story from an article from 1995, and it's saying grade retention. So it's talking about how students who are held back typically are going to be high school dropouts. And I know I've heard that before in the past. So for everyone to act like they do not know this already, especially with them being in the teaching, in the world of teaching industry, the school industry, the academic industry, you would think they would know this already. So students judged by their teachers as not ready for grade promotion are often held back a year to master missed coursework or acquire developmentally appropriate social skills. While retention is intended to improve a student's chance for school success, some researchers have found that the stigma of failure associated with retention has a negative impact on students' self-esteem and subsequent academic achievement, thereby increasing their likelihood of dropping out of school. Alternatively, there is also evidence that suggests that retention provides positive academic benefits to some students that presumably translates into a decreased likelihood of dropping out. A recent study has provided evidence that retention can help elementary school-aged children perform better in classes while improving their attitudes about themselves in school. It is not clear from these findings whether grade retention increases the likelihood of dropping out, or whether grade retention is an early indicator of learning problems, if not corrected, could eventually lead a student to drop out. The first set of findings suggests a negative impact for grade retention. The second set suggests a more positive outcome. While not being able to disentangle the causal effects of retention on dropout rates, 1992 and 1995 CPS data provide the opportunity to examine on a national scale the proportion of young adults who were retained in school. They also allow for the examination of the association between grade retention and dropping out. So although the long-term impact of grade retention is still unclear, the number of young adults who had ever been retained increased from 11.1% in 1992 to 13.3% in 1995. Nearly all of this increase occurred in the early elementary grades K through 3. Although retention rates increased for both males and females, males were nearly 2/3 times more likely to be retained than females in 1995. Consistent with earlier findings, Black students were more likely to be retained than students from other race ethnicity groups. Black, white, and that's a whole nother issue, because the way the tests are written, the books, etc., like that could be another reason why your child is struggling when they're Black. or, another race or ethnicity. So they said Black, white, and Hispanic students were more likely to be retained in the early elementary grades, K through third, then secondary grades 9 through 12. While retention rates increased for nearly all regions and income groups between 1992 and 1995, the distribution remained relatively unchanged. Young adults living in the South and from families with the lowest incomes were at the greater risk of retention in both years, while the observed rates for whites and Hispanics are very similar, 10.2 and 10.4, which doesn't even make sense because Hispanics do not even typically come to our country speaking English. So how is that so? So they said the observed difference between blacks and Hispanics is not statistically significant. That doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, what? Like ours is lower, but now it's, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't know if they mean different parts of the country, because they're saying the South, there was all these families that are low income, or young adults, they were struggling, but now it's like, now it's just insignificant. It's like, what? This lack of statistical significance is related to smaller sample sizes and resulting larger standard errors. So background characteristics. The similarity in dropout rates among retained students from different race ethnicity groups suggests that there may be a common set of characteristics or experiences that results in higher dropout rates for all retained students, regardless of race or ethnicity. In contrast, the race ethnicity differences observed earlier in the aggregate status dropout rates are still evident in the dropout rates among those students who have not been retained. At each income level, students who have been retained were more likely to drop out than their peers who were not retained, but the income differentials are evident regardless of whether students were ever retained. Young adults from families with low incomes were more likely to drop out than their peers from middle and upper income families, whether they have been retained or not. So retention in the early grades may reflect a lack of school readiness or signal a more serious problem with the student's learning ability. As shown in earlier research in 1995, CPS data confirmed that youths whose last grade retention occurred in their early elementary grades are less at risk of dropping out than those retained in the later grades. Lower dropout rates among those held back in elementary school may reflect the positive effect of additional time for mastery and fundamental academic and age-appropriate social skills, or possibly the benefit from special services targeted for students perceived to be at risk of school failure. However, youths that were retained in the early grades are more likely to drop out than their peers who were never retained. So we basically get the same thing over and over. Like, they're saying all this extra stuff. But basically, when kids are held back, they're more likely to drop out. So they said student whose last school retention occurred in the middle 4th to 8th grades or secondary 9th and 12th grades were more likely to drop out than those retained in the early elementary school grades. Not to say they didn't drop out at all, they're just more likely to. Higher dropout rates among students retained later in their school careers may be due to a number of factors, including problems in progressing from one grade level to the next, unhappiness and dissatisfaction with their school experience, the decision to avoid the stigma associated with being held back in school, the decision to start a family, or the decision to seek employment. A small proportion of students retained last year in the upper grades were also retained in an earlier grade, and these repeated retentions may further their risk of dropping out. There is some evidence from the NAILS 88 and the earlier HS&B study that a number of these factors contribute to the decision to drop out of school. Further analysis of the reasons cited for dropping out by retainees in NELS 88 could shed further light on these issues. So, as you can see, basically, they're claiming that if the child's held back in a primary years, like kindergarten to like 3rd grade, they are less likely to drop out, but that does not mean that they won't drop out. That doesn't mean that they don't have any children dropping out who were held back. And then you also have the kids who were held back later in their academic career, so from 4th grade to up to 12, are very highly likely to drop out because you're a lot older, you care what people think at that point, and it's just not a good look. And they said themselves that the scores or whatever they're going off of, they're research is telling you they need to be retention or held back by third grade for this to be effective. So let me know what you all think about this. I'm not happy about it at all. And I definitely think there needs to be a lot more talking about it, research, some training, like you name it, it needs to be happening in the American public school system. So thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And I really appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.